Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The decision took less than a minute to sign, but its consequences struck the palace like a thunderclap. Prince William did not raise his voice, summon cameras, or offer Camilla one final compromise. He simply approved an order severing her last remaining administrative and financial connection to the sovereign grant structure. When the document reached her private rooms, Camilla understood immediately. This was not a warning. It was an ending. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla sat with the sealed papers in front of her and read the opening page twice. The sovereign grant, the public funding system that supports the monarch's official duties and the royal household, had become the center of a personal rupture. This decision did not touch her private wealth. William's final palace directive ended her last grant-linked office allowance, staffing authorization, and expense access, effective immediately and permanently. She lowered the page slowly. The Queen Consort had expected resistance, perhaps another argument. She had not expected finality. A senior aide waited nearby, then quietly explained that the order had been prepared over several weeks. That detail hit harder. William had not acted in anger that morning. The prince had considered this and chosen to close every remaining route back. Charles learned of the decision minutes later. He read the summary once, then again, and his discomfort showed. The king understood the pressure on his heir, but also what this meant to his wife. One sentence inside the directive carried particular force. No future royal household restructuring could restore the terminated arrangement without an entirely new authorization process. The door was not merely shut. It had been rebuilt to stay shut. Camilla placed the document flat on the desk and removed her reading glasses. Her aide began to speak, but she raised one hand and asked to be left alone. When the door closed, the Queen Consort's control slipped. This was not about losing a budget line. It was about realizing that William was already shaping the monarchy around rules she could no longer influence. Then she called the aide back and asked one question, in a voice stripped of anger. What made him decide this had to happen now? No one answered immediately. That silence revealed the real danger. The signature was only the final act. The true battle had begun weeks earlier, behind closed doors. William had closed the financial door in a single stroke. But to understand why he was willing to go that far, the palace first had to confront what each of them believed they were protecting forever. Behind the financial language were three people carrying three completely different fears. William believed he was protecting the monarchy from blurred authority. Camilla believed she was being stripped of dignity piece by piece. Charles feared something more painful than either of them, that the struggle between his wife and his heir was becoming impossible to contain. What looked like an accounting decision was now exposing fractures inside the royal family itself. William carried the burden differently from the others. As heir, he believed the future royal household needed tighter boundaries, fewer overlapping offices, and one clear chain of financial responsibility. The royal household was simply the network of staff and offices supporting official duties, but to the prince it had become something larger, a test of whether the next reign would inherit clarity or confusion. Catherine understood that pressure. During a private conversation, she watched him return again and again to the same confidential briefing note, a restricted internal paper summarizing sensitive financial concerns. William finally placed his hand over the closed folder. There has to be one system, not competing centers of influence, he said. Catherine heard no triumph in his voice. The Princess of Wales knew he disliked humiliating Camilla, yet he had reached a point where avoiding confrontation felt more dangerous than causing it. He told her quietly that protecting feelings could not become an excuse for preserving arrangements he believed would weaken the crown later. Still, Catherine noticed how long his hand remained on that folder. Camilla carried a different wound. She told Charles in private that the cut felt less like restructuring and more like someone dismantling her place inside the monarchy, while she was still serving beside him. The Queen Consort had spent years building a public role, and her office represented more than staff or expense approvals. To her, it represented legitimacy, continuity, and proof that she belonged within the institution rather than merely beside the king. Charles listened, but his silence only deepened her fear. Charles then asked the question William had been avoiding. Did the prince intend further changes? The king expected reassurance. Instead, his heir paused. He did not confirm another decision, but he did not deny one either. That hesitation changed the mood instantly. Camilla understood that the sovereign grant cut might not be an isolated move. Charles understood it too, and for the first time he looked less like a monarch controlling events, and more like a husband trapped between two people he could not afford to lose. The real answer remained inside William's confidential briefing note. Catherine knew it. Charles sensed it. Camilla feared it. And the fracture had become personal, but its origin lay in one specific evening, when a routine royal funding discussion suddenly crossed a line William was never prepared to ignore. Weeks before Camilla received the final order, a private Windsor meeting had ended in silence, so cold that even veteran aides understood something irreversible had happened. The gathering was supposed to settle routine household spending ahead of the next financial cycle. Instead, one request connected to Camilla's office triggered a confrontation with William and transformed a quiet administrative disagreement into a battle over who truly controlled the future royal machine. William entered the meeting expecting numbers, not rebellion. Around the table were Charles, Camilla, and two senior financial officials, reviewing office allocations for staffing, travel, communications, and official administration. Those allocations were simply the approved pools of money used to keep different royal offices functioning. The prince wanted several overlapping costs moved into one central system so future spending could be tracked clearly. Camilla wanted one exception preserved, and that request changed everything. Camilla asked that her personal office keep separate authority over selected sovereign grant-linked hospitality and staffing expenses without William's proposed oversight. The Queen Consort framed it as continuity, not defiance. She argued that her team needed flexibility to carry out duties without seeking approval through another office every time. William refused almost immediately. The future king told her that any publicly supported royal office had to operate under the same structure, being prepared for the next reign. To him, the issue was control. To her, it sounded like erasure. Camilla's frustration broke through. She asked William directly whether he intended to treat her office as temporary, as though everything built beside Charles was already being prepared for removal. The prince did not soften his answer. No office, he said, could sit outside the system simply because changing it was uncomfortable. Charles remained seated, listening with growing sadness, as his wife and heir stopped speaking about budgets and started speaking about legitimacy. Then the moment everyone remembered arrived. Camilla pushed her chair back sharply and said, "Then say clearly what you are trying to remove." William closed the folder in front of him. The ambiguity. Charles looked from one to the other and understood the damage immediately. The king knew neither of them was fighting only over expense approvals anymore. Days later, one of the financial officials sent William a confidential memorandum, a private written record outlining repeated overlap between Camilla's office and central household spending channels. The prince also discovered that several exceptions granted during Charles's reign would remain active unless formally cancelled. Suddenly, he had both the reason and the procedural path to act. Camilla learned soon afterward that William had begun drafting a termination order. She demanded a private meeting at once. From that Windsor meeting onward, the argument was no longer about expense lines, It was about status, authority, and whether Camilla would accept William drawing boundaries around her future. Camilla did not wait for another memo. Hours after receiving the final directive, she requested William privately and made it clear that aides were not welcome. When he entered, she remained standing. The document sat between them like evidence. For the first time, there was no committee, no advisor, and no carefully softened palace language to absorb the impact. Camilla wanted to hear from William himself why he had chosen finality. Charles had urged them to meet because silence was making the damage worse. The king knew the decision had already taken effect, which meant this conversation could not restore the old arrangement. It could only expose the truth behind it. A final directive was a formal internal order that changed how the royal household operated. And this one had already removed Camilla's remaining independent access to certain grant-linked staffing and expense approvals. There was no simple pause button left to press. Camilla began without ceremony. "You could have come to me first." William held her gaze and answered that he had come before, through meetings, proposals, and attempts at compromise. The prince said those discussions had produced promises of cooperation, but no lasting structural change. She fired back that cooperation was difficult when every new proposal seemed to reduce her office further. He replied that keeping overlapping systems alive, simply to avoid offense, was exactly what he could no longer defend. Camilla pressed one hand against the back of a chair, but refused to sit. She asked whether William understood the humiliation of having loyal staff told that their budgets would now answer elsewhere. The queen consort's anger was sharp, but beneath it sat something more painful: the fear that her years of service could be reduced to an administrative problem. William said he understood the personal cost. He also said embarrassment could not determine how the monarchy was structured. Then William revealed what had hardened his position. The confidential financial memorandum, a restricted written account prepared for internal review, had documented repeated spending overlap and exceptions broad enough to keep the old arrangement alive indefinitely. The prince said that was the moment he stopped seeing the issue as temporary. Camilla immediately understood something else. Charles had known the review was happening. The king had never told her how advanced it had become. Her expression changed. Anger gave way to hurt. Camilla asked quietly, "Is there anything left for me to appeal?" William paused before answering. "Not under the old arrangement." The words landed harder than anything before them. William then added one final warning. The decision had been possible because authority inside the household had already shifted more dramatically than she realized. Camilla had demanded to know why he acted, but the deeper shock was discovering how much power he had already gained to make the decision stick. The confrontation exposed the emotion. The next revelation exposed the power. William had not simply decided that Camilla's financial arrangement should end. He had spent weeks confirming that the household structure could be changed without leaving a hidden route back. Every authorization, staffing line, and discretionary exception had been traced. What appeared to Camilla as one brutal signature was actually the final move in a carefully constructed transfer of control. William's authority came from more than personal influence. The prince had been given expanding responsibility over future household planning, while Charles had already approved a wider restructuring of royal expenditure. The sovereign grant, the public funding system supporting official royal duties, could not simply be seized or redirected by one family member. What William could control was the internal palace process deciding which offices received specific grant-supported staffing, travel, and administrative resources. That distinction gave the future king room to act without turning the decision into a personal confiscation. Charles felt the full weight of that structure when he read the final implementation schedule alone. The king reached the page, showing Camilla's office moving into a centrally administered model, with private funding covering anything outside approved official support. He stopped. Then he set his pen beside the document and said nothing. His private secretary finally asked whether he wanted the next meeting postponed. Charles barely reacted. The decision had become real in a way the earlier arguments never had. Charles later confronted William with a quieter accusation. Necessary decisions, he said, could still carry unnecessary cruelty. The prince listened, but he did not retreat. He told his father that leaving even one symbolic exception would preserve exactly the ambiguity they had spent weeks removing. William believed a small compromise would not calm the dispute. It would simply give the old arrangement a path back. Then came the detail that made reversal even harder. A senior palace finance officer confirmed, in a documented internal briefing, that William had deliberately closed 3 administrative loopholes that could otherwise restore separate funding later. The prince had traced temporary exemptions, discretionary staffing approvals, and legacy authorizations before signing the final order. Charles understood immediately. This had been designed to endure. Catherine had also shaped the outcome, though differently. A private account from her meeting with William showed that she supported clearer financial boundaries but urged him to protect Camilla's dignity in public. The Princess of Wales feared that structural reform could turn into personal humiliation if handled carelessly. William agreed on one point: the change would target the system, not Camilla's ceremonial standing. The power behind the decision was now undeniable, and within hours, that power would stop being theoretical, as Camilla watched the machinery of her office change around her. There was no dramatic ceremony marking the end. No announcement was read aloud in a grand hall. Camilla simply walked into a familiar office and discovered that the system around her had changed. Staff who once brought financial approvals directly to her were now instructed to send them elsewhere. Meetings were cancelled. Access codes were revised. And for the first time, the Queen understood what William's signature meant in daily human terms. Camilla expected the usual morning briefing. Instead, her longtime secretary was waiting with a revised responsibilities sheet and an expression that told her enough before a word was spoken. The centralized household structure meant that official finance, travel authorization, hospitality spending, and staffing requests would now pass through one shared approval system rather than her office acting independently. Privately funded activity could continue, but it would no longer carry the same separate sovereign grant connection. That mattered, because the change did not merely alter paperwork. It reduced the freedom her office had exercised for years. Camilla took the pages and began reading. The Queen Consort reached the staffing section and stopped beside 2 names. "Are these positions being eliminated?" she asked. Her secretary explained that the roles were being reassigned, not abolished. She ran her finger down the page and asked, "Have they been told before me?" The answer was yes. She closed the folder without another word. The anger that had carried her through the confrontation with William suddenly disappeared. These were people who had worked beside her, trusted her, and built their routines around an office that no longer operated the same way. Then Camilla noticed a sealed note attached to the revised plan. William had personally ordered that no employee lose salary during the transition. The prince's message was brief, but its meaning was clear. He wanted the structure changed, not ordinary staff punished. That distinction unsettled her. It became harder to dismiss the decision as simple revenge when he had taken steps to protect the very people caught in the middle. Camilla received another surprise later that morning. A documented account from the transition briefing showed that Catherine had privately asked William to leave ceremonial support around Camilla's public duties untouched. The Princess of Wales had argued that financial restructuring should not become a public stripping of dignity. She wanted clear boundaries, but she did not want humiliation turned into spectacle. Camilla read that account twice. Her view of Catherine shifted almost against her will. The Queen Consort had expected distance, perhaps even quiet approval. Instead, she discovered someone had drawn a line between reform and cruelty. The cut had wounded Camilla's pride, but Catherine's quiet intervention opened a door William's order never could. And behind that door came the first real shift in the conflict. The turning point did not come from a constitutional advisor or a financial briefing. It came when Catherine asked to speak with Camilla alone. No private secretaries, no William, no Charles. When the door closed, two women who had spent years navigating the same royal institution from very different positions finally spoke without anyone translating their words into palace language. What followed did not reverse the decision, but it changed what the decision meant. Catherine arrived knowing the financial ruling would not change. William had already told her privately that the structure was final, and the Princess of Wales was not there to bargain on his behalf. A constitutional advisor is someone who helps the royal household understand questions of authority and public duty. But this conversation needed none of that machinery. She told Camilla directly that she had come as family because an administrative dispute could not be allowed to harden into permanent bitterness. Camilla resisted at first. The queen consort said the real wound had never been money. It was the fear of disappearing. Every reduced office, every transferred responsibility, every new approval line felt to her like preparation for a monarchy, in which the years she had spent beside Charles would eventually be treated as an inconvenience. Catherine listened without interrupting. Then she answered carefully. Preserving someone's dignity, she said, did not mean preserving every structure built around that person forever. Catherine went further. She told Camilla that fighting every change only convinced William that stronger barriers were necessary. The prince was not trying to remove her ceremonial place, public respect, or personal security. He was targeting the independent financial machinery he believed created confusion about future authority. The distinction mattered. For the first time, Camilla heard the decision explained without anger attached to it. Then Camilla broke her silence about something she had told no one outside a private recorded conversation with Charles. She had considered asking the king to overrule William publicly. The queen consort had imagined forcing the issue into the open, but she abandoned the idea after realizing what it could unleash. An heir versus monarch crisis would turn a family dispute into a constitutional spectacle and place Charles between his wife and his successor before the entire country. Catherine absorbed the confession and said nothing for a moment. The Princess of Wales understood how close the family had come to something far worse than financial humiliation. Eventually, Camilla agreed she would not challenge the order publicly. Catherine reached the door, but Camilla stopped her. "Tell him I still think he was ruthless," she answered. "I will." Then came the words that changed everything. "And tell him I understand why." Inside the room, the conflict had finally cooled, but outside the palace, the first details were already breaking, and the public reaction would give William's decision an entirely new meaning. By morning, the private financial battle was private no longer. Broadcasters opened with graphics about royal money. Commentators argued over whether William had shown discipline or disrespect. Outside Windsor, cameras gathered before breakfast. Yet one image captured the mood more powerfully than every panel debate. Camilla arriving for an official engagement hours after the story broke, stepping from the car without changing her schedule and refusing to look defeated. Charles watched the coverage in silence as the argument grew louder by the hour. The palace had confirmed only that royal household financial structures were being streamlined, meaning spending and office support were being moved into a tighter shared system. But it refused to release details of the private exchanges between William and Camilla. That silence created its own storm. Some saw modernization, others saw humiliation. The king became visibly upset when one commentator reduced the entire dispute to a war between his wife and son. William refused to react to the noise. Advisors suggested a symbolic concession, something small enough to ease the pressure without restoring the old arrangement. The prince rejected it. He believed public pressure could undo the clarity he had deliberately created, and he feared that one gesture made for appearances would become a permanent exception later. Still, the future king was beginning to understand that institutional control and human cost were not the same thing. Then, palace correspondents received an unexpected detail through a documented briefing from Camilla's office. She had instructed her staff not to brief against William. The queen consort would not feed hostile stories, challenge his motives publicly, or encourage a counterattack. Journalists had expected anger. Instead, they found restraint. That choice changed the tone instantly, because it suggested she had decided dignity mattered more than revenge. Camilla's next appearance turned the argument into something even larger. A fictional newspaper front page carried the headline, "William Draws the Line," alongside coverage of her entering a charity reception while crowds gathered behind barriers outside Clarence's house. During a live broadcast, one presenter called the moment a public refusal to retreat into humiliation. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "Keep going, Mom." She stopped, turned, smiled briefly, and continued inside. William heard about that moment soon afterward. The prince did not reverse his decision, but the story reached him differently now. Camilla had accepted the financial loss without disappearing, and that forced him to confront something no briefing note could measure. Authority carried emotional responsibility. The country had chosen its symbols, but behind palace doors, William and Camilla still needed something no press statement could provide: a final understanding of what had been lost and what would remain. In the end, the most important moment contained no signatures at all. William found Camilla before an evening family gathering and asked for a few minutes alone. The financial decision remained unchanged. There would be no restored allowance, no revived exception, and no quiet reversal months later. Yet both of them now understood that if the monarchy was going to survive this transition, victory could not mean making the other person smaller. William spoke first. The prince told Camilla that he regretted the humiliation caused by the speed and bluntness of the change, but he did not regret making the structure clearer. The sovereign grant arrangement, meaning the public funding framework supporting official royal duties, would remain under the new centralized system. Her independent administrative link to it was finished. Camilla listened without interrupting. The queen consort then told him that clarity did not excuse cruelty, and she still believed he could have handled the decision with greater compassion. Camilla also admitted something harder. Keeping a special financial exception simply to preserve pride would have created another confrontation later. She understood that now. Her public duties, ceremonial position, and household support would continue, but the machinery behind them had changed. That distinction mattered because she had feared disappearance. Instead, she was being forced to separate status from control, dignity from financial independence, and personal worth from the structure of an office. Charles felt the tension finally begin to ease. In a private conversation recorded in a documented family account, the king expressed relief that neither side had forced him into a public choice between his wife and his heir. He had feared damage to both his marriage and the continuity of succession. Catherine had helped prevent that outcome. The Princess of Wales had become the emotional bridge, reminding William that reform without dignity could become punishment, and reminding Camilla that respect did not require every old privilege to survive. William understood that lesson when the conversation ended. Before leaving, the future king offered Camilla his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. There was no embrace, no dramatic apology, no attempt to rewrite what had happened. But the restrained gesture ended the feud more effectively than any palace statement could. Camilla left hurt, but not defeated. William left stronger, but more aware that authority carries a human cost. Charles finally saw that the transition he had feared was already happening without destroying the family around him. There was nothing left to reverse, nothing left to threaten, and nothing left unresolved. The money had been separated, the boundaries had been drawn, and the royal family finally understood what the decision had cost them all. Camilla had lost control without losing dignity. William had gained authority without losing compassion. And the monarchy moved forward with clearer limits, uneasy respect, and no path back to the old arrangement. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.